System Failure listeners. Nate here up in Maine, Brian down there in Rhode Island. Brian, what is the good word from Rhodey this week?
Well, long time no see, which is a joke because this is our second take on the podcast.
Yes, indeed. We don't mind lifting the curtain a little bit and showing our ass here. We did record the entire podcast only to discover that there'd been a small issue with the PodTrack P4 and that we didn't get the recording. So we're doing this episode from the top once again, and I think this is going to be an extremely high-quality edition of the Good Old System Failure podcast. Why? Because we've already rehearsed this entire show once. So I think we're going to be in top form today.
Well, second time is a charm, as they say.
Second time is the charm. Well, I would like to pay you a compliment here, Brian. This is only the second time in 3 years that we have lost an episode. I would have thought at the outset that we would have, 6 to 12 lost episodes. I would consider 6 to 12 after 3 years to be a decent rate, just human nature being what it is. But this is only the second episode we've ever lost. So my compliments to you, Brian, on being very effective. I'm amazed. I'm honestly amazed this hasn't happened more.
Well, I appreciate it. One podcast a year or so, I suppose, is a reasonable rate.
Yeah, it's an outstanding failure rate, I reckon. I guess another exciting week, Brian. It's been nonstop in the news and on the podcast circuit. Let's see. I think first up we had Mr. Cenk Uygur popping up on Dave Smith's Part of the Problem podcast, which is Cenk Uygur is a noted lefty, and Dave Smith is a libertarian righty. So it's nice for me to see the horseshoe theory, the two ends of the horseshoe, where the extreme left and the extreme right are actually the same. Which is just another way of saying that working class people have the same interests, and the ruling elite or the propertied class, the billionaires, have another set of interests, and that's the real fault line in society. So loved seeing Messieurs Uygur and Smith getting it on their podcast. What did you think, Brian?
Well, I am down with the Young Turks again. See, there was like a hot minute there when Jimmy Dore was doing a lot of bitching about the Young Turks, and like Anna Kasparian was coming after Jimmy Dore like a couple years ago.
I think I vaguely remember this.
Yeah, and she was saying how Jimmy Dore had, maybe made some crass remarks or something because Anna Kasparian was wearing these like short skirts to work. There was like some controversy for a hot minute there. And then Jimmy Dore was saying that they took like millions of dollars from some like Democratic donor, and they had taken a turn for like supporting the Democratic Party. I think this was during the Biden years or something. Maybe they were just really out on Donald Trump after the first term. Maybe that like fit into it. It's funny because I'm sure we'll be talking about Jimmy Dore later. But in any case, I used to listen to the Young Turks for like kind of back in the day, and then there was that whole bit which I kind of sided with Jimmy Dore, but now like Anna Kasparian is like, was she on Tucker? Or was she on Candace Owens' show? And anyway, they're kind of back to just kind of criticizing the establishment, and so I am down with Cenk once again.
Well, that's good to hear. Cenk Uygur, his nephew is Hassan Piker, the noted communist streamcaster, right? Doesn't this man, Hassan Piker, doesn't he stream every single day on Twitch? Isn't that his thing?
See, it is kind of crazy that Hassan Piker is his nephew, and Hassan Piker like went to Cuba, and I guess the subject of Cenk's visit on Dave Smith, or at least part of it, was they've both been banned from England. But that is some solid political activism going through their bloodline there.
And also, furthermore, the Young Turks, if I'm not mistaken, is the name of the party of young radicals from Turkey itself who overthrew the rotting and decaying regime of the Turkish Sultan in the last days of the Ottoman Empire after World War II in 1918. I think I've got that right.
Yeah, I remember.
So they run this. Go ahead.
I was just learning about them. I think in college I took a class or something and we learned about the Young Turks, and that is just what they did.
Yeah. That's interesting. And obviously, Mr. Cenk Uygur and his nephew Hasan Piker are Turkish. I think both were born there. I believe that's the case. And that's why they have funny names, because they've got those good Turkish names. And so that's who we're talking about here. And they've notoriously been lefty commentators, as you say, Brian. But at certain times, they've lined up with the interests of like the DNC, which is like deeply disturbing and disappointing. But it's nice to hear they've found their way. I suppose we all have our story of disillusionment, or coming to realize that the Democratic Party is some kind of a puppet, or it's also it's also funded by the same donor class, and so they're what you'd call controlled opposition. That's to say they're there to make you think you have representation in our federal legislature, but they really, we don't. And so, yeah, that was the main thrust of the podcast. Cenk Uygur was on with Dave Smith because he and Hasan, his nephew, had been banned. Their visas got rejected by His Majesty's government over there in the UK, so they couldn't go and give their talk at Oxford as planned, which is hilarious. I think they may have mentioned it, or maybe someone else mentioned it when talking about the fiasco, but like this does nothing but expose, like it doesn't make His Majesty's government seem like they know what they're doing, seem like they're competent. All it does is Streisand affect the plight of Cenk Uygur and his nephew Hasan Piker, to where everyone it's on everyone's lips, not on the mainstream media naturally, but in the independent media, podcast sphere, drop site news, places like this that aren't funded by corporate dollars.
Well, it's pretty offensive, right? I mean, in the West, we're supposed to be like built on like free speech and the exchange of ideas. And they think that banning Cenk from giving just like a talk that I probably wouldn't even heard about in England, merry old England there. Pretty weak, I would say, from our reptilian overlords.
Well, there are four things I truly love about America, Brian. Football and barbecue are, up there. The Second Amendment, gun rights, another good one. But then the thing I love the most about America is free speech, right? Because you're right, the notion of free speech comes to us from the Western tradition, but in places like Canada, Australia, and England, the government can call down the newspaper and can a story, and they legally have to comply. They don't have the same kind of freedom of the press that we have here. So I don't know. I mean, I like, just free speech is not as all about those thousands of people getting rounded up in the UK because they posted something critical of the government on social media, right? They get a visit from the police. Like, you can't imagine that happening in America. So America has many, many problems. I think capitalism is the diagnosis that I would give to this ailing patient. But there are still some great things about America, most notably that freedom of the press, freedom of speech, man. Whew, you'd hate to live without that.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, Piers Morgan is always saying that, like, the problems in England, like, I don't know, like, with, like, immigration. And, well, there just was this whole scandal where, this white dude got shanked by, I guess, like, a sheik who are allowed to like carry like a knife or whatever.
Yeah, the Sikhs. The Sikhs. They're like they're a religion. They're like Indian and Pakistani, and they wear the turban everywhere they go, and they also have ceremonial knives that they're supposed to carry as part of their religion, right?
Yeah, and I guess it is true that like once you like draw the knife on someone, you're certainly not allowed. That's like not allowed, but I guess you're allowed to have the ceremonial knife where other people are not, and. I don't know. Well, anyway, between that whole scandal and this banning of Cenk here, it doesn't sound great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was certainly an interesting. That was the reason. The reason the podcast happened was because of this weird thing where the government banned Cenk and Hasan from showing up. But the conversation within that podcast turned in a very interesting direction, namely this idea of Thomas Massie's defeat, in what was it, the 51st district of Kentucky? I can't remember what district he is. 51st seems too high.
The fourth. Okay, that's
Kentucky.
Much. Yeah.
4th district of Kentucky. Representative Massie suffered a defeat there 2 weeks ago, and it's interesting. It's a question, like all of this AIPAC money went to support his do-nothing opponent who refused to debate him and just kind of posted to victory on the back of attack ads with AI-generated videos that were not real of Mr. Massey disappearing into a hotel room with some some members of the whatever the like AOC and Ilhan Omar. I can't who it was.
No,
There was some.
it.
What's that?
That is the trio depicted.
That was
in
a trio.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's really seemed to sway the election, and the reason it swayed the election, Massie lost by like 10 points, so it wasn't like a close thing. He had won his district handily in going away fashion many times over. But with this introduction of this APAC money, they could float ads on the local TV stations that fooled the TV watching populace into thinking that Massie was in cahoots with the extreme left element of the Democratic Party, when nothing could be further from the truth. And so it was interesting to note that what we have really here is a tale of two cities with respect to the corpus of the voting populace in the United States. We've got young people like you and me who get all of our news from social media sources. And then we've got the boomers, the older generation who isn't familiar with the newfangled apps and websites and still gets their news from a legacy media that has been wholly co-opted by corporate interests, much like the political system itself. So where you have the political system and the media working in concert because both are funded by the same corporate dollars. And so, as mentioned, you end up with a tale of two cities where you've got a whole bunch of old boomer voters who can be swayed by political attack ads against Thomas Massie, and then you've got the rest of us who are just kind of waiting for the older generation to die off, so that corporations won't be able to pull these shenanigans, or in this case, the Jewish lobby, the Israeli lobby. Extremely critical to think of it as the Israeli lobby and never the Jewish lobby. So it's interesting to see, I don't think that those dollars could be effective against young folks like you and me. It really depends on this older cohort who isn't aware that the news is filled with, propaganda, regime propaganda.
Yeah, well, clearly, the boomer demographic are the only people keeping this, these dads and grandfathers watching Fox News are like the only ones keeping the establishment in place. Yep.
Yeah. But okay, so I just think that we have to make sure that we resist the temptation to allow ourselves, the working class, to be divided along any kind of demographic line other than people who provide goods and services for their living and other people who live on property, who own property and make a living that way, right? That's the real dividing lines in this culture war we've got going on. But they would rather have us fight amongst each other, fight amongst ourselves, maybe thinking that older, like our parents are the problem. Our parents' generation is the problem, or maybe immigrants are the problem, or maybe the LGBTQ people are the problem, but really none of those people are the problem at all. And really the principal conflict we're dealing with involves, again, the property classes who make their money off owning property, and the rest of us who actually man the trenches and actually provide the sumptuous buffet of goods and services on offer here in the domestic United States.
Yes. Well, one thing they were talking about on that podcast was I don't know, the boomer demographic, versus the Jews. Well, you just have these commentators. Well, you have Nick Fuentes, right, and Dan Bilzerian, whose whole platform is blaming the Jews, and they don't want to limit it to Zionism or something, or they just want to say that the Jews are the problem, and so I mean, I think the boomer demographic is it kind of is a problem in that they are the bastion of support for the establishment, and everyone else gets their news from various sources that are not under the oppressive thumb of the reptilian overlords.
My thought on the thing about anti-Semitism is that it's a hot commodity for the Israeli government. It's precious currency to them. They depend upon it. That is how they pull the trick of managing to depopulate the Arab communities within their borders and keep those people subjugated without any political representation at all, They have no political rights whatsoever. They're able to get away with this because anyone who criticizes it gets slapped with the anti-Semitism label, and that is very effective at shutting people up, especially here in the domestic United States, where our entire mythology is built on World War II, where we were the people that were supposedly the ones that are going to come in and stop you if you try to put your population in concentration camps or kill them or deprive them of their political rights or oppress them. Right? We're the country of freedom that goes and rescues others around the world, and so it's part of our mythology that we can't tolerate anti-Semitism in any way, shape, or form because the Holocaust is so central to the story. It's so central to how we understand ourselves, to the story we tell ourselves about ourselves here in America. And so anti-Semitism up until October the 7th has been a consummate weapon to shut up critics of the Israeli government. And so they depend wholly upon it. This is why Benjamin Netanyahu, right, brags about funding Hamas, right? It's like his quote, I think he's made this quote a couple of times. You can find a couple of different instances of it, but his statement is like, by funding Hamas, we can control the height of the flame, like we control the baddies. And it's much like the way that the Obama administration they needed ISIS as the bad guys to justify military intervention in Syria, for example, right? It's like it's why we were the ones that originally funded Osama bin Laden, or we were the ones who originally funded Saddam Hussein, right? It's like we're always funding both sides of these conflicts, and the Israelis are pulling the same trick. I'm reminded now of a good example would be the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 through 1988. We were so mad at the Iranians for taking out the puppet that we'd installed in 54, like the Shah in 79, that they took over our embassy and took a bunch of Americans hostage, and it was a big deal. And so in order to, and because we the United States was an opposition to the Iranian regime at that time, we supported Saddam Hussein in his invasion of Iran in 1980 and supplied the man with the chemical weapons he used to do it. And he did use those weapons on Iranian populations, and that's why that's part of the reason the Iranians hate us so much. We've done so many bad things over there. But the point is that so we were funding Saddam Hussein in his invasion of Iran between 1980 and 1988. But then we had another little problem. You see, our CIA needs black funding. It can't go to Congress and justify, appropriations of U.S. tax dollars for like assassinating labor organizers or building heart attack guns, things like this nature. They can't go to Congress and get approval because they don't want that. They can't have that civilian oversight into what they're doing. And so in order to raise funds for their black budgets, they do think like when it comes time to fund the Contras in their fight against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Well, what do we do? Well, we're going to sell a bunch of arms to the Iranians through the Israelis as a channel, like through a back channel. And we can raise a bunch of money. We can get a bunch of Iranian money, but we can sell the Iranians arms they desperately need, and then we can get all the money we need off of them to fund the anti-communist activities in Nicaragua. This, of course, all blew up in '89 with the Iran-Contra affair. But man, so we in the United States are in the business of providing arms to both sides of that conflict. And it's very similar to what's going on in Israel. So this is why I say, and so in order to deflect criticism from that, anti-Semitism is their main weapon, the main tool in their toolbox. And so they desperately need anti-Semitism. And so it makes one wonder, does these guys like Bilzerian and Fuentes who criticize the Jewish people in general as if, Barry Levinstein, your dentist, has anything to do with the goings on in Gaza? Right? It's like, no. It's like, I just wonder if these anti-Semites are planted. I never really listened to them, so I don't have a good feel, but are they out there saying what they're saying is specifically to provide the currency that the Israeli government, our vassal, needs to deflect criticism away from their nefarious misdeeds? I don't know, Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, well, there's this idea that like Nick Fuentes is a Fed, and that gets bandied around by Candace Owens, and I think Tucker Carlson. I'm not exactly. I mean, Tucker Carlson had Nick Fuentes on, and I guess after the interview, the interview seemed to go cordially enough, but then afterwards, Tucker Carlson was saying bad things about Nick Fuentes. But, Nick Fuentes, I mean, he does a good job of speaking to Gen Z or whatever. I mean, he's like playing GTA and like he's like chasing down some guy and he's joking that he's Ben Shapiro and he's saying that he's just trying to, have an interview with him. But hilariously though, there's like this feud that's developed between Dan Bilzerian and Nick Fuentes where, let's see, Nick Fuentes is saying that Dan Bilzerian like invited him over and asked him if he knew how to like assassinate people in Israel, and this is the allegation anyway. And I guess like Jake Shields or Sneeko or someone was like also saying that this happened, which all seems hard to imagine, but the whole thing is crazy. And then there is just footage of Nick Fuentes. Well, the whole reason he gets called a Fed is because like on January 6th, I mean, he was out there, he was giving a speech like very close to the White House, telling people to go into the White House.
Wait, this is Fuentes.
Yes.
This is not Ray Epps, the FBI dude who was on camera telling people on the bullhorn saying, we gotta storm the Capitol. This is Fuentes was doing this also.
Yeah. And so, the Ray Epps incident is fairly well known. But yeah, Nick Fuentes was doing this too and somehow like avoided prosecution. And so, I don't know, like obviously Nick Fuentes is like grown in influence and he probably has some large financial backing from somewhere. I mean, he was like completely debanked for some time. But
yeah, he got kicked off he was on the do not fly list, all kinds of fun for Mr. Fuentes.
Well, so like Nick Fuentes, he's like ahead of the curve on like criticizing the nation of Israel, but this whole this insistence on I don't know, blaming the Jews or whatever is like obviously extremely beneficial to the Zionist cause because they get to frame things, they get to frame themselves as like a people under attack. Although hilariously, like Gad Saad doesn't have any problem going on the Joe Rogan podcast and like blaming the Nation of Islam or saying that like there's something fundamentally wrong with like Islam as a religion, which is a wild take.
Gad Saad, he's the Canadian professor from Montreal who is a expat from Lebanon, if I've got that right.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
Yeah, he's also Jewish himself, supports the Israeli cause, but also potentially maybe worked for Mossad back in the day. I think doesn't he admit to work for Mossad or something? Unclear exactly if that's the point or not.
I think he like joked about it, or I don't think he like actually was like a Mossad agent. I think he made some offhand comments that like other people have latched onto. It's not supposed to be like a serious thing.
I see. Well, I don't listen to Mr. Fuentes too often, the young kid who's from Chicago. He's got that hilarious, Midwest accent. But the one point, he would pop up on some of these major news networks, or pop up on some of these mainstream news networks, I should say. And he would, as a guest, he would make the point, and I always loved this one, that he would be talking about wanting to restrict immigration here in the United States. And he would get that, well, is that so bad? You don't like what are you, xenophobic? You don't like foreign cultures? And his response was always that he wanted the same policies the Israelis had, our close ally that we support with all these billions of dollars. He just wanted to bring that same policies here. Now, surely the commentator is not opposed to, is not critical of the Israeli government, but the mainstream media people can't criticize the Israeli government, so that kind of puts them in a bind when Fuentes says what he wants for domestic immigration policy is just to copy and paste the Israeli policy, and surely you don't object to the Israeli policy. That's hilarious. Always loved that, but I don't understand the anti-Semitism thing. It's like it's just so clearly, specifically the Israeli, and it's like a specific party within the Israeli regime. It's not even all Israelis or the entire Israeli government. It's just this one political party that's doing all this horrible, evil stuff. And it's just hard to imagine that this anti-Semitism is not. It's so dubious. I can't imagine it being injected into the discourse naturally. It does seem like there's got to be an ulterior motive here, but who knows? That's why I never listen to the likes of these guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, Nick Fuentes, he's certainly like a smooth operator in his ability to podcast. He's described as having a high verbal IQ. And so he certainly can go on and just talk for a couple hours all by himself. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's just hard to believe that blaming the Jews is really supposed to be like a serious philosophical approach to undoing the knot that we find ourselves in politically. But yeah, I mean, there are like obviously factions in Israel, and like part of Netanyahu like trying to continue this war is because he's going to be arrested like once it ends.
Right.
And
he's got corruption charges on, and only because of the ongoing state of emergency is he allowed to delay his corruption trial.
And I think is it the Times of Jerusalem or something, like is a news source that we've referenced many times, and is I mean, I don't know how I looked into like that controlling the height of the flame, I think is what I found through their news source. And just all this bit about how like money is brought through Hamas to Hamas. It's something like reported like via Jerusalem, via these like bags of money. That's like their reporting and whatnot. So
right, yeah. Israel's own. You're right. Israel's own media sources report that that Hamas is funded by the Israeli government, who they're supposed to be fighting against. It's just so strange. It really is like there's this meme that I always loved, and they dusted off on the internet during wartime, and it's like a bunch of college kids. They've ordered lobster. Have you seen this meme, Brian? It's like 3 or 4 college kids. They're squatting in a circle. Maybe it's like 6 college kids. They're squatted in a circle. And they've put in the lobster's claws a knife, so there's 2 lobsters facing off. It's like betting on the cockfight, except they're using lobsters, and each lobster's been given a steak knife to attack the other one, and they're putting money on the ground to bet on this or that lobster. The image is overlaid with it's got like Iranian teenagers, American teenagers are the 2 lobsters fighting each other, and then the people standing in a circle around the ring betting on them are like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and the other defense contractors. And that really is kind of like it does seem like these fights are arranged to make people money, right? That's what these wars are always all about. There's always some banking interests or something that start the war, and then these banking interests are funding both sides. We can really go into the history of World War I and World War II with that going on. But just a preeminent example is the major funding of the Third Reich that comes from American corporations through the Brown Brothers Harriman Investment Bank on Wall Street. So was it like the Ford Motor Company made the railroad ties, the railroad tracks that lead into Auschwitz, for example. So there's a lot of there's a lot of tie-ins with American corporations on both sides of the war and the lead up to it. It's like I think once a week we have to say on this podcast, all the world's a stage. And the wars are definitely a big part of these manufactured drama, and it's wild it's wild that the Israelis' own newspapers acknowledge this. The border between Gaza and Greater Israel is like the most secure border in the world, right? I'm thinking of October 7th now. There was all these strange coincidences surrounding October 7th, like strange orders for the IDF to stand down. The border itself is heavily fenced. It has automated laser turrets, where the laser locks onto a target and the turrets will gun down whatever coyotes been so unfortunate as to wander near the fence. But none of those defenses held up on October 7th. And so it really, mix that in with Netanyahu's corruption trial, the massive protests that were roiling Israel in the months leading up to October 7th about the consolidation of power and the elimination of the influence of the Israeli judiciary. I think there was some kind of reform that was going to remove power from the judicial branch of the Israeli government, and so the whole country was up in arms about that, and a whole bevy of problems for the ruling elite in Israel were solved by the October 7th incident. And so I also think it's related to this whole business of the boomer, like we said it before, but like the boomer demographic, well, like they're dying by the thousands every day now. And what are they born between 45 and 60, something like this? And the people that get their news from the old timey news stations that are subject to corporate dollars. That generation is dying out. And I think the Israelis realize this. They are a vassal state and they rely on us for their funding. The only with the left-right combo of nearly unlimited U.S. funding and strident labeling of people of anti-Semites. Right, these are the two ways that the Israeli government is able to get away with displacing millions of Arab citizens in a region of the world where they're surrounded by other Arab countries that are very unhappy about this. So that's how they can get away with projecting power in the Middle East only through U.S. support. And I think that the Israeli, the hardliners over there, the Likud party, Netanyahu and his band of merry pirates have calculated that their time is running out, that they're not going to be able to pull off a Thomas Massie trick indefinitely into the future, that the American opinion on Israel is turning fast, and so they only have a very short time window to complete the Greater Israel Project, namely their conquest of southern Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank and beyond. They're going to have to get as much of that accomplished right now as they can, because there's not going to be a tomorrow, or the U.S. populace is just not going to support Israeli expansion for more than the next couple of years at most, if that.
I guess like the patches that the IDF forces wear like has like Greater like Israel on it and whatnot. Like it's got like the larger map and so forth. And
that is uncomfortable.
But I think anyone who's like vaguely critical of like anything like understands that these wars start under all extremely dubious circumstances, going back to like the sinking of Lusitania and Pearl Harbor and 9/11 and what's the one in Vietnam there?
The Gulf of Tonkin incident, another dubious non-event that precipitated our invasion of Vietnam.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nonstop, man. You mentioned the sinking of the Maine, right? You said that one, the sinking of the Maine in Havana Harbor.
I did not, but that's like the war against Mexico or Spain or whatever.
The Spanish-American War of 1898. That's awesome. Really appreciate that. The USS Maine blows up in Havana Harbor under deeply dubious circumstances. What is the name? Oh man, William Randolph Hearst. I think it was. He said, "You give." He's like, give me the headlines and I'll give you the war. I can't remember his quote now, but it's just awesome. It's like yellow journalism. That's what you call it. Journalism that's meant to facilitate a war rather than report the news honestly. That's just, boy, have we got a problem with that in the United States.
Yeah, like one idea I've been vaguely like tossing around in my brain, though. I was trying to think about like why does war happen? Because it seems like, we should be at peace. Like we're supposed to live like in a civilized age and whatnot. But like the problem is you just have people who have accumulated like an insane amount of wealth. And so like, I don't know, these people like get to decide what happens. And what these insanely rich people want is this Greater Israel Project.
Yeah. Well, that's it, man. You're hitting that really tells the story of the Thomas Massie defeat, doesn't it? That you can just flood the zone with money and get the political outcome you desire. That's like the opposite of democracy, right?
Yeah, well, you got to wonder how many of these elections they can spend $30 million to win. But man, like like the Graham Platner, like the attack, headlines are in full swing, eh?
Yeah, obviously. Obviously, we've got Mr. Graham Platner running for Senate up here in Maine, and he's got a lot of Bernie Sanders-esque ideas on how to treat the billionaires. And so that has attracted national attention. And I'm sure we've all seen the headlines flying about Mr. Platner. What does his wife send out some sex? Oh, no, he sent out some sex messages when he was supposed to be married to his wife. That's the scandal here?
Yeah, well, they were doing like defense research in 2020. Or they were doing defense research, and they... one of the things they figured out, well, they do defensive research for the campaign to try to figure out how their campaign might be attacked. And so like one of the things they talked about internally were these text messages from 2023. So it's not even that it was like a real like issue like for Graham Platner and his wife or anything. It's just that this was talked about as a potential line of attack, and well, now they're trying to attack it, but it's these headlines like like will Graham Platner's like checkered past be disqualifying is the nature of the headlines.
And what is the law of that whenever a headline asks a question, Betteridge's law of headlines, I'm just googling it here, Betteridge's law of headlines is an adage that states any headline that ends in a question mark be answered by the word no. I like this headline. Will Graham Platner's checkered past affect his Senate run? Well, we can assume the answer is no, and that the point of such an article is to raise awareness about Mr. Platner's checkered past, eh?
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. Well, you gotta hope that these attack ads will only cause people to double down on their support for Graham Platner. But I guess you got to imagine that in Maine there, it's just going to be another question. It's going to be like, the boomer demographic versus everyone else in terms of how this plays out.
Well, Brian, to wit, I found myself over at WGME.com this week. Now, that's our local Channel 13 news, the local CBS News platform. They'll have the goings on about the local high school football concerns or whatever, local weather, and then a bunch of it's part of a national platform, so it's got a bunch of national headlines in there. And I just pulled it up to see what it looked like, and I got a screenshot here, and let's see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 articles on the front screen. There's like all the front big headlines, some minor headlines, some top stories, and a pane on the right. There's 13 of them. 9 of them are about Graham Platner. Excuse me. And a 10th one is a glowing picture of a smiley Susan Collins, our notoriously corrupt senator from Maine, who's Platner's running against. And so you can just see that the propaganda apparatus here is in full effect when it comes to the old school media, the legacy media that the boomers still turn to trust to this day. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see, much like the Thomas Massie campaign in the 4th District of Kentucky, we're seeing that up here in Maine. It's in the Wall Street Journal had like 3-4 hit pieces on Graham Platner this week. You can just see that the billionaires, the propertied class, right? That's the real division in this country: the people who own property and then who make their money with property, and the rest of us who actually have to provide some goods and services and make our money that way, right? It's like this relationship between the two classes is the real one here. And that's really what I think of when we talk about the boomers, Brian. I mean, looking at WGME.com and seeing nonstop muckraking against Graham Platner is disheartening. And you're right. It is a problem that the older generations don't know how to use new and sophisticated, decentralized means of getting their information. But they are just confused, right? They're not the real villains. They're just confused. And I guess my heart goes out to the older folks, because I too was a devotee of NPR right up through Russiagate, right? I mean, I stuck with them through their lies about the Iraq War. They were guilty of merely being stenographers for the intel services in the lead up to the Iraq War, and not actually reporting on they didn't actually do any journalism at all. They just repeated that weapons of mass destruction, we got to go into Iraq, and then it turned into a disaster, and there was much soul searching on the NPR news side as a result of that, and I was snookered by it. So I don't know. I mean, it took like the Obama war in Syria and the Obama bailout of the banks, and it took a long time for me to catch wise. I wasn't. It was hard for me to figure out that the Democrats are just controlled opposition, that they're just a puppet of the propertied classes, and that the working classes, those of us who actually do goods and services for a living, that we have no representation at all ever since the Clintons pioneered this whole strategy of funding their Democratic campaigns with corporate donors instead of the dead labor unions that hadn't survived the 1980s and all of the offshoring and the union busting engaged in by the Reagan administration. So I don't know, man. I think we just got to keep our eye on, we got to resist the temptation to blame Jews or boomers or anyone else who isn't a member of this propertied class. So we must, well, look, I mean, it's like a policy failure. We have to, what should be happening is like Dave Smith, as noted, is one of these libertarian types. And the libertarians are always saying things like, all taxation is theft. And maybe that's true, but it is an indispensable tool. Just think about, I think about like the asset markets, like the inflation of assets like real estate or stocks. Like these assets, when you're a billionaire and you already have a couple of yachts, right? If you become a trillionaire, you can't really buy any more yachts, right? There's only so much consumption. You can only eat so much caviar and lobster, and then it doesn't matter how much more money you get. You just can't increase your consumption of caviar and lobster anymore. And so it's like what happens when you leave too much money in people's hands, when there's too much excess wealth floating around. You get the wealthy, they don't consume with that money. They don't buy any more goods and services. They just buy assets that will turn them a profit, assets that will give them some kind of a dividend and yield or rent. or assets that will appreciate in price. And so it's like obvious to me that like the fact that houses used to be $100,000 and now they're $750,000, you know, well, let's say when they went from like 150K to 500K, you know, well, that's extremely damaging to the economy. But that happens because we don't tax excess wealth enough. You have to remove you can't allow, it's dangerous to allow people it's dangerous for the economy when you allow too few people to have too much of the money. And it's obvious, like what would happen if we brought back massive taxes on the wealthy like we had in the 50s and 60s and 70s? Well, obviously, right? What would happen is that in order to pay their newly increased tax bills, all the rich would have to start selling off assets, creating a fire sale situation, right? Anytime you increase the supply of assets on the market, but don't do anything with the demand, you're going to see the price go down. And so you would even see less demand because you would be taxing all of that extra money. Past a certain level, it does nothing but distort the asset market to leave people with way too much money in their bank account. So anyway, I see the taxation as the only tool that can solve the massive appreciation in the asset markets, short of an economic collapse, which is, I'm sure, what we're going to get. Like, we're definitely going to we're not going to tax the billionaires. We're just going to allow the system to collapse. That is the great pattern of history, right? The wealth addiction, the pleonexia cited by Plato is the great problem with civilization, right? That's what's going to happen again if history is any indicator at all. So we can look forward to that. But this is all just my big plea to not blame the boomers, not blame the Jews, not blame the immigrants, not blame members of the LGBTQ community. Instead, blame the propertied class, who must be curtailed so that they stop blowing out the prices in property markets. Making sense, Brian? I don't know. I hope that all makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think the problem with the libertarian critique is that, like, government is downstream of power. And so I think if you talk to libertarians, what they envision is like a volunteerism where basically you should be able to like choose the government that you have and not have it be foisted upon you, which certainly would be great if we could have like a marketplace for governments. But the problem is that you have people who have accumulated enough wealth to run the whole world. And so just the whole world falls into lockstep around like COVID or Donald Trump's first administration. And now, well, I mean, like the attacks on like Russiagate being an example of like, it was just like a worldwide, like all the media fell in lockstep in attacking Donald Trump as being some kind of Russian shill. And I guess that narrative has been completely dropped. But I mean, obviously Donald Trump has been successfully co-opted by the powers that be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Like, you would think that the Donald, I don't know. You would think we had a first term with no new wars. You know, I just thought we could make it through a second term with no new wars, but I guess that wasn't. It really does seem like Trump has totally thrown in his lot with the establishment, or whatever the hidden, unseen structures of power that exist over our nominal heads of states is. That's who Donald Trump seems to have fallen in line with, and that's amazing considering that. I mean, the same cabal was going to have him thrown in jail 5 years ago, whenever it was, when he lost the 2020 election. I mean, it's like, man.
Well,
yeah, it's wild. I just can't believe we got sucked into this war in Iran. All of Obama's predecessors like the list of 7 countries that General Wesley Clark cited in 2001. Right? It's like like the Obama administration is involved in Syria and Libya. The Bush administration is involved in Iraq, you know, and so it's like Iran is like the last one. And of course, we'd be remiss not to mention Mr. Russ Hochstein, who was one of these Biden staffers, came out saying that the Biden administration was preparing for war with Iran. Also, they were running the war games. You know, they figured they might have to do it. So whatever unseen forces insist that the American empire go into these 7 states who are all enemies of Israelis, right? It does seem like it doesn't matter which party we select, Democrat or Republican, we're going in no matter what. We cannot vote against that foreign policy.
Yeah, whoever you vote for, you're voting for John McCain.
Yeah, you'll say that's funny.
But obviously, well, the tactics taken by the establishment as a whole were obviously completely effective in compromising Donald Trump's ability to do anything good. And so I don't know, maybe like Donald Trump just never had any intentions of creating positive change. But I do think that the Donald probably cares about his legacy to at least some extent when, he's not making these craven cash grabs with like Trump coin and whatnot. And
you'd think it'd be in his list of his hierarchy of importance somewhere. His legacy, his posterity.
Well, there were these headlines about how like Donald Trump was telling Netanyahu this week that everyone hates Israel now, and so I mean it'll still be interesting to see how it all plays out here on the war with Iran front. It's hard to imagine but yeah, there's still time.
Well, Brian, a few moments ago, I think you really said it, that the government is downstream of like the billionaire class, that diagnosing the problem as a problem of governance ignores the fact that the government has been yes, we understand the problem. Like, this is what the libertarians would say, that the governments are always hopelessly corrupt, so we should have as little of it as possible. But I mean, but their analysis ends there. It's like, but who is doing? There is a party doing the corrupting. Right? That's the real source of our woes here. The idea that all government is bad is no matter what, I think is very limited, right? In reality, there is a range of like quality that a government, you can have terrible governments or good governments, right? There's like a slider there. You could have regulations that are really, really good and regulations that are really, really harmful. It's not that all regulations are harmful. That is way too simplistic. But the point I wanted to segue into what I consider to be the absolute podcast of the week, and that is the aforementioned comedian Jimmy Dore's appearance on Tucker, and it sounded for all the world like Tucker at the very top of that podcast. The first 2 minutes was finally warming up to Marxist theory or leftism or something like that. But he was like, yeah, it's very hard for right wingers like me to admit, but it does seem like the billionaires are more dangerous than the government. Like, all right. Welcome to the show. That's it right there. That is the realization that the right seems to be lacking in my considered view. So that was pretty wild to hear at the top of Jimmy Dore's appearance on Tucker. Eh, Brian?
Yeah, well, let's see. I mean, they talked about a lot of things. One thing, they were comparing the United States to China, where they've got this one-party system versus our two-party system. And I guess what I've heard about the Chinese system, I think from Professor Zhang, is that loyalty to the party is basically everything, and who the people in the power who are in power, you just kind of have to agree with what they say. But on the other hand, we just have this two-party system in the good old USFA that's just completely farcical. And people legitimately, on the left, believe that the problem is people on the right wing, and the people on the right wing legitimately believe that the Democratic Party is the issue, and if they just got control, everything would be fine. And it is just like Lucy and Charlie Brown in that football. How many times can you keep falling for this?
I just am Charlie Brown, so my heart goes out to them, as I mentioned. I mean, it took me till the Snowden revelations to finally realize the Obama administration wasn't going to save us. That was 2013. He'd already been reelected, and still I was having trouble figuring it out.
Well, it's just extremely difficult, coming out of high school, and you're going to vote in your first presidential election. And if the Republicans have been in power, it's really hard not to believe that there's a simple solution, and it's just to vote for the left wing on that ticket. But time and time again, it just ends up being exactly the same.
Yeah. Messieurs Tucker and Dore were discussing this in the specific context of the Massie defeat in Kentucky that we've already talked about. It really is a poor advertisement for the state of American democracy when AIPAC can just buy that seat and silence their biggest critic. I mean, this guy Massie is a hero in terms of the Epstein files, and we talked about Iran-Contra a few moments ago. Well, Mr. Epstein, of course, cut his teeth as a mentee, a protege, right? If you have a mentor, then you're the protege of Anand Khashoggi during the Iran-Contra. It was when you want to sell some arms to Iran through Israel as a back channel, you need a handler. You need people who have the right connections. And that is the world that Jeffrey Epstein comes from. And Ghislaine Maxwell's old man, Robert Maxwell, right? These shadowy figures. So yeah, like I say, a poor advertisement for American democracy. It seems like if you can't vote your way out of invading Iran, if AIPAC can simply buy Thomas Massie's seat, it really does seem like we have a $1 one vote system, and not at all a one person one vote system. And a $1, just because there's voting does not mean there's a democracy. A $1 one vote is not democracy. You have to have, it has to be a one person one vote system. So yeah, man, bad news on the democracy front. It's like voting is really just a ritual to. I mean, I'm going to go to the Gorham town office on Tuesday and ask my vote for Mr. Platner, God and country. But does it really do anything, or is it just a ritual to manufacture consent for a horribly corrupt system that you have to feed innocent people into to turn a profit? And no matter what, that war machine is going to carry on. So yeah.
Well, the good news is they have to spend increasingly more to win these elections, and you just got to wonder, like, how many elections can they afford to spend $30 million on? Yeah.
It does seem like this is all coming to a head, which is very, very interesting. I do sense that, like, now that the Donald's not going to be up for re-election, we can move past the idea that the Donald Trump is some kind of a unique threat, and we just have to suspend any sort of expectations of our Democratic representatives just to get Donald Trump out of office. I think that is totally gone. And so, yeah, I would like to believe that people are waking up into a reality where we don't segment our population by who votes for who in the left versus right contest with two nearly identical corporate candidates anymore. So here's hoping, eh?
Yeah. Well, what did you think of Jimmy Dore's analysis of Jungian analysis?
Yeah. Well, this was the meat of the. This is. I mean, it's all well and good to bemoan the lack of democracy and the fact that we have billionaires running everything, and lament the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the defeat of Thomas Massie. But the meat of this podcast was Jimmy Dore making a delightful presentation about Jungian psychology. Now, Brian, what do we know about the Swiss psychologist, Dr. Carl Jung?
Man, well, let's see. He is into dream analysis and understanding your subconscious, and this idea that we have some kind of relationship to the divine is, those are some of the talking points.
Oh, if I wanted to get specific, I would describe Jungian psychology thusly. Whereas, Jung's mentor, I'm having trouble with mentor and protege today, but Jung's mentor was, of course, Sigmund Freud, the Austrian psychologist. And Sigmund Freud was a big materialist, right? This is the God is dead man. You know, we all know this is Freud's, and he was very into your sexual like our sexuality having a big impact on our psychology. And he was the guy that thought that we had killed God and we're moving forward into a new secular materialist conception of reality. And he's right about that. We are moving into a materialist conception of reality. But that model is not sufficient to explain what's going on. And that's why we need the genius, Carl Jung, to help us understand the following. In the same way that evolution has outfitted each of us with a body that contains functioning organs like your liver or your kidneys, right? These things are hidden inside you. You don't ever get to see your liver or kidneys, but you yet benefit from their proper functioning because they're products. They're honed through millions of years of Darwinian evolution to do that. So the notion here is that just as we are armed with a complement of functional organs bequeathed to us by evolution, so too we are armed with a battery of invisible mental organs, structures, I should say, mental structures that allow us to that facilitate evolution, that facilitate new generations and the success of the human story, whatever you judge that teleology to be. And so these invisible organs, right, these organs of the mind versus of the body, are what we would call archetypes, like the goddess of love, or the god of war, right? There's a whole pantheon of different archetypes. This was illustrated in that Pixar movie, Inside Out. Do you ever see this one, Brian, about a young little girl who plays youth hockey in Vancouver, I think? and riding around inside of her mind is her various emotions. There's like a Lewis Black plays the anger emotion, and Phyllis from The Office plays the sad emotion. Like kind of the sad sack. In other words, it's like this little girl is living her life, and I think she's engaged in some hockey tournament. And throughout the story, you see inside of her brain like a boardroom sort of setting, a conference table with her various different faculties of her mind sitting around it and discussing what they should do next, and sometimes the sadness character leads the show and sometimes the anger character leads the show. I mean, you get the point here. The point is each of us has this pantheon of archetypes riding around inside of our brain, and that is the principal function that we use to process reality. And one final point here, Brian, then I'll throw it back to you. This is a redux of Platonism, right? The Greek philosopher of the 4th century BC who famously described all of reality as some kind of an illusion through his infamous, or I should say famous, allegory of the cave. The notion that Plato promulgated was that the reality we experience directly with our senses is a imperfect emanation or a version of this hidden realm of eternal perfection, right? We live in a temporary realm of a flawed and temporary fallen existence, but there's this invisible realm of ideal perfection. This realm of forms is what Plato would have called it, but the modern terminology is archetype, and that's the Jungian concept. And so, like Plato had, Christianity is a brand of Platonism. During the fall, Platonism was hugely popular in Rome during its fall. You can understand why, right? These people are living through the collapse of the mightiest empire history has ever seen. And so to them, the idea that they were inhabiting some fallen reality matched their lived experience. And so you can just see why Platonism became, very popular in like the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD as the Roman Empire crumbled. Well, that era spawned a whole bunch of competing Platonisms: Christianity, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, where St. Augustine comes from, and Hermeticism is another one too. These are all Platonistic schools of thought that were dominant in the Roman Empire during its day, and so Jungian psychology is a redux of Platonism. So that's how I see it. The idea that our lives are governed by this invisible, unseen world is, I think, demonstrably true. We're about to talk more about it, but first, Brian, I'd like to get your reaction.
Well, one thing about Jungianism is, this idea of projection and your understanding of other people. Well, you see things in other people that are really like a reflection of yourself. And that's certainly one place where in, Jungian psychology, it's where the rubber really hits the road. Let's see. I mean, our relationship to the divine. Well, I mean, Jimmy Dore was on the podcast with Tucker. They were talking about how, he quit smoking the weed and he I don't know, he started like dreaming again, and he's all into going to a Jungian like psychologist to do like dream interpretation. He didn't mention using ChatGPT to interpret his dreams for free, basically, which is a point I like to ballyhoo about. But
that's some budget Jungian psychology right there.
Yeah, I mean, you have this like relationship to the divine that you can just be accessed by, getting a good night of sleep and like writing down your dreams. And so it's all. I don't know. It's something about it really does justice to the struggle of existence, or like the struggle of I don't know, like self-understanding and understanding the people around you. And so it's fascinating stuff.
Did you ever watch this movie Inferno with, it's like a Robert Langdon, Dan Brown novel come to life with Tom Hanks there? You ever see this one, Brian?
I did not, although it sounds interesting. Also, that Secret of Secrets book I got to read too.
Yeah, buddy. Well, these are great reads. I can loan you a copy of Secret of Secrets if needed, or I can help you download it for free onto your phone, whatever you want. But in the movie, in the book too, but in the movie, there's the main villain is the guy who's going to unleash a plague on the world that's going to kill a huge chunk of the population. And the reason he wants to do this is because of the Malthusian overpopulation problem. Right? This projection that exponential population growth is going to lead us all to a place of, in the movie is all about Dante's Inferno, right? This great poem, epic poem from the 1300s. And The idea is that when the population outstrips available resources, human virtue becomes impossible, right? Human divinity becomes impossible. What you have is people turning and eating each other when there's not enough to eat. And it makes sense. Like in a context where there's not enough food to go around, some people's babies, when some people's babies are going to starve, then everyone turns on each other, right? You have to think of some reason why your kids should be the one to eat. Your kids should be the one to eat, and your neighbor's kids should be the one to starve. And oftentimes in those situations, people end up vilifying their neighbors, right? You have to believe something evil about your neighbor so you can justify the fact that you've condemned their kids to starvation by the simple fact of feeding your own kids, because there's not enough to go around. And oftentimes you seize upon some superficial difference, like maybe my neighbor has a different religion or has different skin color or chances to be LGBTQ or something like that, or maybe they're an immigrant from another country. So it's easy for us to turn on each other, right? Unity is impossible in a situation where there's not enough resources to go around. Why am I bringing this up? Well, you mentioned having a good night's sleep is the key to achieving human divinity. And so I agree, in a situation when you're hungry or tired or thirsty or horny or whatever, it's going to be impossible to achieve, to channel that human divinity, which we'll talk more about in a second. But when you have enough to eat, when you're full, like when you don't have those blockers, right? When the base level of your Maslow's hierarchy of needs is in fact met. When you're not starving, that's when when you're not tired. To your point, that's when you can access the divine. But I think there's another level here. And that's because the experience I've had with magic mushrooms matches Jimmy Dore's discussion of Jungian psychology. So the point that the contention on the table for discussion here is this idea that, yes, it's true, being tired or hungry is going to block you from accessing the divine, but you can, through other means, also accelerate your Platonic ascent out of this fallen material world and into the Plato's ideal realm of forms, with the simple application of 5 dried grams of mushrooms right to the dome. What happens when you consume these? And so we'll get back to the mushrooms, but we're just going to just backtrack a little bit to the idea of archetypes in the brain and how they interact and how that relates to the ego, right? Because the idea here is that have you ever heard these stories, Brian, about how children have a memory dump around age 3 or 4 as they develop an ego? And I've seen this referenced online any number of times. The story here is that you have a kid, you take them to Disney World at age 3, you have a great time, you meet Goofy, you take a picture in front of the Epcot ball, and then you can talk to your kid about the great time you had at Disney for another year or two. But when they get to be 4, 5, or 6 and they develop an ego that is a theory of themselves, they don't remember the trip to Disney anymore. You can ask them, you can talk about it for a year or two, but then they will have forgotten it once they overcome that memory dump when their ego solidifies, right? And this explains why we don't remember anything before the time we're 4 or 5, right? You cannot start keeping a captain's log where you establish this line of continuity that you think of as yourself, right? Until you conceive of yourself as the captain and understand what a log is, right? There's a few prerequisites to keeping the captain's log, and you have to become a captain first, and the way you do that is by developing an ego. And the way that Carl Jung would say we develop an ego is that you're born with this whole pantheon of archetypes. They're all lurking in your mind. And what happens is that as you get older, people treat you as if you're a discrete individual, and you start behaving as if you're a discrete individual, distinct from other people, and you learn to filter out all of the other possible archetypes and narrow yourself down into a single identity that is functional for interpersonal communication, and coordination. And so what happens is that one by one, the archetypes that aren't useful for your particular ego, your persona, your costume that you wear, are subjugated and banished to your subconscious, where they still continue to exist, but not as a part of what you conceive of as yourself. Are you with me so far, Brian?
Yes.
So a funny story, I'm 4 years older than you, so I remember when your ego was in a state of development, and we were, an anecdote to that end is when we were playing hide and seek when you were probably 4 or 5. You were really young. We were at our grandparents' house in Illinois. And I remember that, we have a middle brother. And so our middle brother was the last person. One of our cousins was it. And our middle brother was hiding in the broom closet. I remember the already found Brian standing, with your hands outstretched, blocking off the broom closet and being like, well, he's definitely not in here, right? Because you just hadn't had time to develop a theory of obviously saying that our middle brother is not in the broom closet makes it really obvious that he's in the broom closet. And the reason you just hadn't realized that because you hadn't completely formulated a sense of me versus other. And so it's just interesting that I'm older enough than you to have seen to be able to remember the you coming online in that way. So yeah, what happens is you develop this sense of being an individual, but it's all an illusion as you banish more and more archetypes to the subconscious realm, and only keep the archetypes that match your persona. Like a way that this might happen is like I'm born as a male child, and so I have all these female faculty, like the female archetypes are inside me. But because I'm a male and I can't get away with behaving as a female with the rest of society, I channel the male archetypes instead. My persona is a mixture of a few male archetypes, and all the female archetypes, the goddess, if you will, is banished to my subconscious. And so then when I grow up and I start looking for a mate, you're on the dating apps or whatever, right? Really what you're looking for is the lost goddess who you banished in your, before you conceived of yourself as a person, who's still lurking in your subconscious. Much the way that your liver and your kidneys lurk inside your body, whereas your hands and your ears are obvious, your liver and your kidneys are not obvious to you. They're hidden from you. These organs bequeathed to us by the lengthy process of Darwinian evolution. And so when you're out looking for a mate, you're really seeking out this lost. You're seeking out the piece that's missing from your pantheon, right? And so this is the projection you were talking about. You project this archetypical goddess onto your potential mate, or if you're a young lady, maybe you project the archetypical, the archetypical god, onto your mate. And so then you get to be 5 years into your marriage and you realize I've been projecting the archetype onto this person. This person doesn't really match up the archetype at all. The projection decays and falls away over the years, and you end up with a midlife crisis. You're out buying a Ferrari. Maybe you're snorting cocaine or banging hookers. Whatever happens to people in their midlife crisis, you can see how this could happen to a person. And that being confronted with you with, the idea here is that the idea of Jungian psychology is that you can dive into your subconscious and reintegrate some of those lost archetypes. And before we go, and just to shift it back to mushrooms are a good way to glimpse this temporarily, right? Because it destroys your ego. Whatever the walls are that quarantine all of the unused archetypes into your subconscious, right? Those walls dissolve with the simple application of the aforementioned 5 tried grams. And before you know it, you're experiencing contact with what feels like the divine. Like what we call God is the fully integrated archetype, whereas the ego is trapped in time. The fully integrated divine is not trapped in time, right? Your ego is a function of the way you perceive yourself, right? It's not really real. I reckon that what happens when you die, it's like the mushroom trips, right? You die, and the ego, like the physical body is gone, the ego based on the physical body is gone, but the rest of that unity yet remains. So I think the great lesson here is that we are all God in disguise, like the Hindus say, and we're all each other in disguise, and that our apparent superficial differences are merely a result of the trapping a few of our many archetypes within the container of ego and trying to live that way. Okay, yeah. Does that make any sense? I think so. We got to get to the idea of the great work in alchemy here. But have we laid the bricks here? Have I forgotten anything?
No, I think that's pretty much. A few quick points are that when we talk about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can see why it's important for our reptilian overlords to keep us, at the bottom of the hierarchy pyramid.
A good thought.
So that we have the infighting, and then, just like when you're dreaming, though, you interact with other people, but obviously you're only interacting with yourself. But the illusion couldn't be more replete unless you're an exceptional lucid dreamer. I don't know.
Yeah, those are good points, and so this is why the dream, because when you are asleep, right, you don't have the input from the 4D matrix we all believe we're living in, right? It's like you lose your upload from the construct that we're all living in, the Plato's world of illusion, and now you're just completely adrift in your own subconscious, interacting with various archetypes and other seeming intelligences that are really, your own mind, the overmind, reflecting off of itself. So that's a great point, and that's why if you listen to Jimmy Dore's interview on Tucker Carlson, he's talking about dreams most of the time, because that's the connection that you're quite right to point out.
All right. Well, so what's the next point here?
Well, Well, the last point, and the point I love the most about Jungian psychology, is that the quest here, the idea is to take the parts, the discarded fragments of the archetypes that you have quarantined in your subconscious, and reintegrate them into your personality, right? And that can be a like I have a male archetype that I like, a male costume that I wear, and part of that is like not being fearful or hesitant, not being overly sensitive. Like, for example, like, see, these are some aspects of discarded archetypes. You're kind of, as the men, you're kind of expected to not be the one to, like, you can't be the one freaking out on the flight because there's been some turbulence. You know what I mean? You have to like try to what does it Bill Burr say? You're a man, act like you have answers. And so, like, so it may feel wrong to try to. It may feel like incorporating weakness, right? That, like, since you've discarded the archetypes for a reason. Like for me, I got rid of the female archetypes because it works better for me to channel the male archetypes. And so, reintegrating the feminine may feel like reintegrating weakness, because you've discarded it because you perceived it as bad for some reason. So reintegrating the part, like the fearful part, let's say, the fearful archetype, reintegrating that may feel like you're like integrating a vice back into your life. That's the wrong way to think about it, right? Unity is what you want is unity, and you got to think not in terms of positive, negative attributes. You want all attributes. And so this lends itself, like, Hermeticism is the specific brand of Platonism that brought us Renaissance alchemy. Why? Because Hermeticism emphasizes the magnum opus, or the great work, as the means of transcending this fallen material realm that Plato called an illusion, and ascending to the timeless realm of perfection, Plato's realm of forms. Right? The way to make that Platonic ascent, according to the Christian brand of Platonism, is through moral improvement. Right? The better a person you are, the shorter your trip between earth to heaven. Right? But with alchemy, with Hermeticism, which later became alchemy, the notion is that through a great work you can transcend the fallen illusion we live in and arrive in the realm of perfection. And so that's helpful to me. I mean, we were just the way that I just never really developed much of a motivational structure as a kid, because all of our time was planned for us. So we just went to private school. We had to do after school activities. We had Saturday classes. Our parents wanted us to help them with their new office doing manual labor as a way to try to, instill some character into us. But what that made for was just, I never strengthened the muscle of making my own schedule or doing things for my own reason, right? Like, my reasons for doing things were always external. I had to develop internal reasons for doing things. And alchemy was really helpful. Just the idea, the more I read about like Renaissance alchemy, the more the idea clicked that the great work is the way to ascend the Platonic, to achieve that Platonic ascent. So I always liked that. And you can see with the alchemical idea of taking something base and turning it into something divine, like turning lead into gold, factors in, right? Because you may think that you're incorporating negative aspects, like fearfulness is a good example. You may think that you're incorporating negative aspects into your persona, but really you'll come out further ahead by being having your full unified complement of archetypes available than believing too much in the artificial fence around these archetypes that makes us into individuals. So anyway, I really like that, and the idea of transmuting, figurative lead into gold through the reintegration of cast off archetypical forms is really helpful, I think. That's why I love Jungian psychology. What a great way to think about things.
Yes, glorious, unification of the soul. I don't know. Some developing your relationship to yourself and whatnot. It's good stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, man.
Well, Brian, if we weren't well into overtime, I would launch into a lengthy diatribe about how the actual alchemical, the goal of the idea of creating gold from nothing actually was achieved by the alchemists in the 16th century. We shall have to save that for another episode because we are well over time at this point. But yeah, I guess this is usually juncture in the program where I invite our System Failure audience to pay us a little visit over at systemfailure.org. There you can leave Brian or me a comment and let us know what you think of Jungian psychology. Additionally, you can read the weekly essays written by yours truly, which is a catalog of the genealogy of Platonism through the rise and fall of Rome, the rise and fall of medieval society, and the rise and soon to happen fall of our modern capitalist society, and how the history of ideas plays into that. You can enter your email address and sign up to receive those email essays each and every Sunday right there in your email inbox. That way you'll never have to worry about missing one. Okay, I will be back on Thursday with the weekly essay read of the aforementioned. And then, of course, Brian and I will be back on Monday morning, inevitably, with another brand new edition of a good old System Failure podcast for your consideration. Cannot wait to talk to you all then. Hope you have a great week.
All right, see you.